Sango, I'm John Kane, and this is Resistance Radio. I want to thank you for listening. I want to especially thank WBAI and WPFW for allowing me to be on their radio stations, to be on their airwaves. And I encourage those of you who are listening, even if you're not listening on the radio, I encourage those of you who are listening to support WBAI and WPFW. These stations are why we have a radio show. I mean, I could do a podcast, but there's value in being on the air. The difference between, as my friend Michael G. Haskins used to say, the difference between broadcasting and narrowcasting. Yes, I can be on the air on the radio, and we've seen it when I've done call-ins. We've had people call in who never heard us before, never heard the station, never heard the show, and they tuned us in by accident perhaps, and so this is what we have. We've got a radio show, airs in New York City and in Washington D.C., two of the most important markets on the East Coast, and look, and I'm happy to do so. I call the show Resistance Radio because I speak oftentimes about the issues that we as Native people are always facing and that we are always resisting. Today, I want to talk about something I've talked about before, but I want to talk a little bit about the unique racism that Native people experience. Because I sometimes I don't think that they don't get it. I just don't think people get it. And of course, I can always talk about the mascot issue. That's an easy one. That's an easy one to point out because nobody's used like Native people are by white people for mascots. And I say by white people because we are talking about predominantly white communities that have literally taken our identity on to themselves. And it's funny because we get treated almost as if we are a property. We are a thing that can be owned. I mean, I think Donald Trump even referred to us a week or so ago as our Indian, what do he call us? Our Indian people or something like that. As if he could put that possessive on us because as the president of the United States, he could claim us as his. And, of course, I realize that our identities are really mixed up. And they're mixed up because of 150 years of residential schools, 500 years of genocide, murder, starvation, forced relocations, missing and murdered indigenous women. I mean, there's all kinds of things that have really played havoc on our people, but we're still here. And in spite of the fact that all those schools using us for mascots want to project us as these 18th century caricatures, we aren't those. In fact, most of the images that are used by schools don't even accurately represent us in any way, shape, or form. Or if they do, they're used in areas where the images that they're using, and I think of Massapequa in Long Island, they use a Plains Indian headdress on their Chiefs logo, and it doesn't even make any sense. So there's this apathy about accuracy. There's this whole sense that it doesn't really matter. We're going to portray them as we see fit. Not as history should, not as accuracy would dictate. We own this. We own this. We are white folks. We are white. We are right, and we have the God-given right to take possession of a conquered people, including taking possession of their imagery, of their culture, of their names. We can name them whatever we want, for that matter. And of course, most of that stuff is false. And the reason I bring this up is because when I talk about the unique racism, sure, it's easy to use the mascot issue to demonstrate that, but it's not the only place. And I'm gonna once again talk about some of that. But when you think about, just look at how Donald Trump, one person, look, it took us 50 years to get the Washington football team to change its name. And now he's trying to squeeze them, trying to pressure them, trying to threaten an NFL franchise to bring back a racist name for the team. And when I hear people say, well, he's doing it almost as if he doesn't realize that he's promoting racism. Oh, come on. He knows. He knows what he's doing. Donald Trump has never embraced Native people as anything but an obstacle. I mean, he's like a lot of American history. He viewed his failures as a casino mogul, um, that it was all caused by native casinos. He targeted the Mashantucket Pequots. He went before congressional hearings and basically called, said we didn't look native enough for him. And look, we get that all the time. I get that all the time. Oh, you don't look native to me. I had somebody call me a white boy just the other day online. That I mentioned. I always bring up this because there's nothing that really analogizes the mascot issue more so than saying, look, if you claim you are honoring us with these mascots, then explain to me how you would honor black people. Certainly, black people in history and contemporary black people, they warrant being honored. But how would you do that? What would the image be? What would the name be? And even if you could get over that hurdle, which you can't, you cannot use any name for a people to say, this is the nickname we're going to use. You can't do it for Native people, and you sure as hell can't do it for black people. And imagery, what would you use? But even if you got over that hurdle, how do you think black people would respond to white people claiming their identity, calling themselves black, wearing blackface as a demonstration of honoring black people? They wouldn't tolerate it. So I always bring that up, and then I had somebody say, "Well, you're not black and you're not native, so you have no right to even mention this stuff." It's like, really? I don't care even if I wasn't black or native. Creating an equal analogy is what some people need to understand it. And look, there are people that once I brought this up, they finally got it. And they said, I didn't really understand it until you mentioned that. Until you mentioned how opposed black people would be to being used for mascots, I didn't fully understand it. And it's a shame I've got to go there. But, look, nobody had to create regulations, legal regulations or laws to prohibit the use of blackface or even the N-word for that matter. Nobody had to pass a law or some sort of regulatory policy. I'm not saying the FCC, I'm not saying that there aren't some organizations that shy away from the use of the N-word, and they certainly do, but there's no law saying they have to. I don't believe it's an FCC violation, frankly. It's not one of the 7 dirty words. So you don't need to have regulations or laws prohibiting the use of the N-word or blackface. It's like understood that it's inappropriate. Now, don't get me wrong. There are white people who still use the N-word quite frequently, and I don't want to suggest that. And you know what? Yes, there are black people that use it, but you know what? They can take ownership of that stuff. If Native people decide they want to use the word redskin or shorten it and refer to each other as skins, that's our prerogative. That doesn't mean that white people have the right to call us that. And I don't know why this is so hard to understand. But again, it is understood with other people. It is understood. But with Native people, it isn't understood. And the only rational way to sort this out and to parse this out is to realize that we're viewed differently. And this is among the unique racism. Now, I don't just stop there. I mean, I just don't stop with this idea that, this is about the mascot issue. No, it's much deeper than that. And we have example after example. And I always talk about the 3 legal doctrines that only exist for Native people. The doctrine of discovery, which basically says that Christians could lay their eyes on our lands. I take it back. It wasn't just about Native people. It's only applied today still about Native people because the doctrine of Christian discovery was the church authorization and the embracing of slavery by Europe, all based on this notion that the popes of the time of the 14th and 15th century basically said that, the 15th and 16th century basically said that pagans, or Saracens and other enemies of Christ could just be destroyed. Their goods could be taken, their land could be taken, and their freedom could be taken. So that laid the groundwork for the slave trade. But nobody benefited from the doctrine of Christian discovery more than the United States or its predecessors. So when you have the Jewish lady on the court in Ruth Bader Ginsburg back in 2005 citing the doctrine of discovery as her justification for ruling against the Oneidas, reclaiming by purchasing, not by just taking it, by purchasing land that is in a disputed claim area, and say, no, you can't do that. And then she literally cites the doctrine of discovery. This notion that once the European nations discovered us, that the title to our lands became vested in the sovereigns. First, the discovering nations of Europe, then the colonies, then the states, and the United States. She doesn't say how it became vested. She just says it as a matter of fact. And it's crazy because when you understand her background as a Jewish lady, how could she be such a hypocrite? And, and I understood years later, I think in her book or something like that, she may have backed away from the position, but she didn't change her ruling. It still stands to this day as one of the most, clearly the most obscene use of the doctrine of discovery in modern times. And it doesn't stop there. Look, tomorrow, or this week, I should say, whether one of these days this week, there's a conference being held in Buffalo. And it's talking about native sovereignty and the federal trust responsibility. And I talk about it all the time. There is no federal trust responsibility. There's no trust. A trust is a legal arrangement. So every time I hear our people say trust relationship or trust responsibility, or the federal government has a trust responsibility, or that they are our trustees, we are fulfilling their hope, their claim that we are the wards of the federal government. There's no basis for that. There's no legal basis for it other than racism. Racism is the only basis for the federal government to claim that we are wards of the federal government and that they have made themselves. Because look, a trust is a legal entity. It's a legal arrangement. It's an agreement. And it starts with somebody who has the power to create the trust, the grantor or the trustor. That individual, that entity designates somebody as the trustee, and that trustee has a responsibility, a fiduciary responsibility to the beneficiary or the wards of that trust. The same person cast us as the wards, cast themselves as the trustee, and created this so-called trust relationship, which doesn't really exist. And I know it doesn't exist because Sam Alito of the Supreme Court flat out said it doesn't really exist. Well, it's not really a trust. That's what he said. It doesn't have the same responsibilities. It's really our tool to control native peoples. He says it. He said it in the United States versus Hickory, an Apache case involving mining. He flat out says it. And nobody refuted what he said. They know it's all true. But again, the only basis for the trust doctrine is racism. And it still exists today. Then to take it one notch farther is the so-called plenary powers doctrine. And this is where Congress has not only a unique authority, but an unlimited authority to control the lives of Native people. They don't have that same control over anybody else. No other human beings on the planet does Congress have this kind of power over. Not even prisoners. I mean, prisoners have certain rights, but as far as the plenary powers doctrine, which isn't a law, although it's been codified into law, it's just a legal theory that they've created laws upon, and that theory says that Congress has ultimate authority. And then where they say they claim that it comes from is from the Constitution, and it doesn't. How do I know that? Because two of the guys sitting on the Supreme Court flat out said it doesn't. Clarence Thomas and again, Sam Alito. And what Sam Alito questioned was, well, if there are limits to that authority, I don't see where they are. And when the Solicitor General was asked about this thing in a specific case on the Indian Child Welfare Act, he said, well, Congress is limited in their application of the plenary powers doctrine by, by the trust responsibility, which doesn't exist either. So it's like completely circular reasoning. So I bring all this stuff up because as I sit here today, I realize that people just don't understand. They don't understand that Native people are still being treated differently. Even as there's been progress, we could argue there's been progress on civil rights and that kind of stuff. And we gay marriage, and of course some of that stuff gets pushed back on by the by the right. The civil rights movement. Nothing has changed for Native people. Oh, they pass a law that says we are free to practice our culture or our religion. That's not a gift. You didn't have the authority to take it away in the first place. That's like jamming a stick in somebody's eye and say, well, let me get that stick out of there. I'm not going to fix your eye. Your eye has still been poked out, but let me grab that stick that we jammed in your eye. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. So, I mean, I bring all this stuff up because I don't think people fully understand the level of racism that still exists against Native people and how much this administration, look, when Trump is told, or somebody raises the question about Trump wanting to bring back a racial slur to the NFL franchise. And then I see how the media has covered it. And they say, well, I don't think he realizes that he's promoting racism. Yes, he does. It's what he's always done. I mean, to suggest he doesn't realize that he's promoting racism, clearly he does. So why is it? Why would he even jump into this stuff? And of course, the easy answer is, well, he's just trying to he's trying to create a distraction from his Epstein problems and his cutting Medicaid and SNAP benefits and all this other stuff in his big, beautiful bill. I think that's part of it. But part of it is about ginning up his base. Because as they start to feel the effects of some of the things that he's done to them, because look, he's only trying to take care of wealthy people. He doesn't really care about poor white people, but poor white people say, well, he's white though. So he's got to keep shoring that up. So what does he do? He throws in some red meat, saying, well, we're going to bring back the Washington Redskins. Yeah, and I mentioned this last week to Reggie on the show. I can say that word on the radio. I can say the R word on the radio, but I can't say the N word. Isn't that, that's the world we live in, right? That's the unique racism that Native people experience. But make no mistake about it, Trump knows that he's promoting racism. It's not like, he's oblivious to it. He knows he's promoting racism and racist stereotypes. That's what he's doing. I mean, look, and it's not just about what he knows. He's got a whole stable of attorneys and researchers who can tell him, look, Native people have been fighting against that Washington name for 50 years. And yeah, can he find a couple of token natives who will say, oh, no, I'm in favor of it? Yeah, you can find those guys. Look, I got a call from CNN this week. So I don't know when the article is going to come out or where it's coming out exactly. It was a phone interview. And this was what the topic. Again, Trump, between what he's trying to do in Washington and even trying to get Cleveland to change its name back to what they had before and their old logo. This is what I got a call from CNN over. And the funny thing is, the interviewer asked me, are you frustrated that after all these years, this is still a battle that's ongoing? And I had to say, no, not really. I mean, because I more than anyone, I use this mascot issue to demonstrate that it is emblematic of the unique racism that we experience. So I'm not saying I needed the racism demonstrated by mascots, but the fact that it's there, and the fact that I've got to fight the commander in chief of the United States, I got to take him on, and I do so willingly. Look, I would do it in a heartbeat, and I don't care about the consequences. There are some things that you just have to fight for, and this is one of them. And I don't mean just the mascot. I mean to fight the racism that we experience. Now, look, I'm not doing the whole, what do we call it? oppression Olympics. I'm not doing that. I'm not trying to compare what we're going through to what anybody else is going through, especially, everybody's very aware of the devastation that's happening in the Middle East with Gaza or even in Ukraine or whatever else. I'm not comparing the racism that we experience to the ongoing bloodshed that exists in other areas of the world. I'm not doing that. But it's been going on for a long freaking time, folks. And there doesn't appear to be any end in sight. Even on the mascot issue. Look, yeah, we got 9 states, I think, with mascot bans. You've got a president of the United States trying to fight New York State. Ultimately, he would have to fight the other states and fight the NCAA, the National Collegiate Athletic Association, for their ban on the use of native mascots. And he's not going to be successful. I mean, one of the things that I said in the CNN article was, I'm not worried about his success. And frankly, if he delays one school in Long Island from changing its mascot for a couple of years, we're in this thing for the long haul. We've been fighting this stuff for a long time. I don't think that he, in much the same way as there have been things in history that begin a trend, and I think about the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights coming out against this the use of mascots, and then the Commissioner of Education in New York telling schools to get rid of it. Yeah, there was a real swing, and people began to move away from the use of native mascots. Then when the Washington football team dropped its name, more schools dropped them. And when Cleveland did the same thing, more schools dropped them. So there are things that happen that start to turn the tide. And I think the trend is really clear that native mascots are going away. Is Trump stepping up for Massapequa going to turn the tables? No, it's not going to happen. For one thing, I speak to the folks at NYSED, at the New York State Education Department. They are not going to comply with Trump, even if he did issue an executive order, which he's being asked to do. They're not going to comply. They don't think he has the legal authority to do it. So I'm not really worried that Trump is going to have any success. And again, I think this idea that he doesn't have to be successful. He's just doing this to again, throw some red meat to his base, to distract from some of the problems that he's got going on in his administration. I mean, he's only been in office for 6 months, folks. And he's already, started trade wars. I mean, now he's even threatening Canada with more trade problems because Canada seems to be opposing Israel's war in Gaza more so than the United States ever will. So I mean, you can't emphasize enough how many problems Trump has created for the country, for the people, and even for himself. So when he's trying to dodge some of this stuff, this is the kind of thing that he does. He creates these kind of distractions, and and I'm not diminishing the fact that he has influence. I mean, I brought up last week there was no way that he could really stop the transfer or the building of a new stadium on the old grounds of the RFK Stadium, that he has no authority to do so. I'm not saying he doesn't have influence. He does. I mean, but he doesn't have legal authority to stop it. So, look, I got to remind people, we are listener-supported radio, and we count on your support to do programs like this. And I realize that there aren't a whole lot of programs like this. So having stations like WPFW and WBAI that will take a chance, will go out on a limb for voices like mine to be heard, they deserve praise for that. And look, there's a lot of forces working against this kind of, this kind of media. We are not the mainstream media. We're anything but the mainstream media. We're not even, even social media. Look, at this point, Facebook isn't even keeping some of my stuff posted and allowing my stuff to be shared. So I encourage people, if you see this video pop up on Facebook, you can't count on me necessarily to share these videos, because I think Meta or Facebook is limiting my access. So there are a lot of forces working against voices like this. But what we have is you. We have you, the listening audience. So I do ask, and let me give some information out so you know how to support WBAI and WPFW. If you're listening in New York, or if you'd like to support WBAI, which I hope you will, you only need to go to buddy.wbai. That's buddy.wbai.org. Follow the prompts. You can become a buddy, which is a sustaining member of the station. You can become a sustaining member of the station by signing up, or you can do one-time donations or time donation or whatever you got to do. You can do it right over the phone. If you want to call, you can call, and that number is 1-833-922-4692. That's 1-833-922-4692. Look, if you happen to get answering service or an answering machine, just leave your name and number, and somebody will get back to you as soon as possible. Or, like I said, do it online. It's safe, it's secure, and you're supporting a station that is providing programming you're not going to hear anywhere else. If you're in Washington, D.C., and look, having the opportunity to broadcast in New York City and Washington D.C. is something most broadcasters would dream of. Now, are we the biggest stations in those two markets? No, we aren't. But we're there, and if people want to hear, they know how to find us. And of course, I put this up as a podcast. I put it up as a video on both YouTube and Facebook, so you can definitely catch this program on radio or throughout social media. It's there. But we need your support. We need your support because there are a lot of forces working against this kind of programming. So again, if you're listening in Washington or you want to support WPFW, I ask that you go to WPFWFM.org or take to the phones and go to 202-588-9739. That's dial 202-588-9739. Or if you want to dial toll free, you can dial 1-800-222-9739. Again, follow the prompts, whether you're doing it online or on phone. Make a time donation, become a sustaining member of WPFW. You can do it there as well. And there you can do, look, with either WBI or WPFW, you can do $5, $10, $15 a month. You can treat it almost like a streaming subscription that you do with your, Netflix or whatever, Apple Plus or whatever you're signed up to. And if you're not, then this is one streaming service you should sign up for, because we're there every week and you get to set how much you want to pay. You get the same amount of access whether you do $5 a month or do $15 a month. So I'm asking that you join the station, become a member of these stations by making a donation, either as a sustaining member or as in a one-time donation. That's what I'm asking of you. I can't express how important this is. And like I said, we live in a time where there is an attempt to silence voices like mine. And without the radio, it would be hard to have the kind of access that I have. So to you, that is, to you. So again, I ask that you support these radio stations. I ask that you, and if you catch this as a podcast or as a video on YouTube or Facebook, I ask that you share it. I know I was sharing it to a bunch of different group pages and that kind of thing. I am being limited as to how much I can do. For whatever reason, last week's video that I posted on Facebook had the fewest number of views of any video I've posted in years. So I don't know if the counter is off. I don't know if this is something that Meta or Facebook are doing to limit access to the videos. But I know if you share them as listeners, it's different than if I share it as the creator. So again, I hope that you'll support the shows, support the dialogue, and look, you can get a hold of me. I'm on social media. You can get a hold of me, and I appreciate that some of you do. I was pleased that CNN reached out to me. I know we've had a couple of good programs that I've done on other, not only other radio shows. Brian Lehrer comes to mind, but other media outlets. But we're still the minority. The vast majority of the media is playing ignorant to a lot of these issues. And I'll give you another example of what the media has been doing. They always frame the mascot issue and the ban in New York State as something that the state has threatened to cut funding from schools. They haven't. The state, again, the New York State Education Department has not specifically or directly threatened any school with cutting funding, not even Massapequa. That is an option for them. They do control state funding to schools. So they can do that. But they also control or have the right to remove officers from a school, from a board of education, from a superintendent. They can remove people from the administration of these schools. That is much more likely something that NYSED would do than cut the funding. Even to these affluent white schools, they have plenty of money. They have, not only do they have plenty of money, they have enough money to waste. When I hear schools talking about spending, that it's going to cost them $20 million to remove the mascots, like, whoever authorized you to spend that much money in creating some sort of school brand for you? I mean, nobody gave you that permission. In fact, 20 years ago, you were told not to do that. You were told to phase them out, not double down and spend more money. So, in spite of that waste of money, and frankly, I think NYSED would be well within its rights to scrutinize the amount of money some of these schools have wasted. And because a lot of this money, look, I get it. There's booster clubs, there's other places that money come in, but some of this is just school funding. They build into their capital improvements, throwing a couple of $1,000s more into putting a logo on their artificial turf, or painting their gym floor, or creating uniforms for entire staffs and everything else. So there's any number of things that they do to waste taxpayer dollars. Removing the mascot from their schools was something that never had to cost them a dime, because again, over 20 years ago, the commissioner at the time, during the Pataki, a Republican, I might add, governor, Richard Mills, told schools to phase them out. Do it over time. Do it in a time that's practical. Well, now Dr. Rosa, the current commissioner, said, no, you don't have all the time in the world. But NYSED will negotiate with a school. If they do need more time to get rid of them, they're not going to be penalized if it takes an extra year. But they need to talk about what their plan is to get rid of them. So now you get schools like Connecticut that are saying, oh yeah, we want an extension of time. We're working towards it. We're doing this, and this. And then you start hearing people saying, well, they're going to try to keep T-birds instead of Thunderbirds. So you wonder, so you made a deal with the state to phase out your mascot, and now what's all this hubbub about trying to keep this thing? And then lying to the New York Post and saying, yeah, we just made a deal with NYSED that we will drop any future lawsuits against them, and they're going to let us keep T-birds. No, they didn't. They never said that. Nobody from the Board of Regents or from the staff at the New York State Education Department made that deal. They said, if you want to make that argument, you can make that argument, and we'll hear it. But no, we're not giving you T-birds. So anyway, I know some of you who are listening to the show are saying, man, this guy talks about the mascot issues constantly. And I have to say it again. Part of the reason I bring it up is because it is so emblematic of what Native people experience. And I don't think that people can appreciate for a moment what it must be like to be a kid in a school with one of these mascots, or to be a kid in a school that competes against a school with one of these mascots. I mean, don't forget, there were schools that were putting up banners that said, get ready for another trail of tears. I mean, that's like telling Jewish kids, get ready to board another train to Auschwitz. And that is a proper analogy. It is. We've seen a Philadelphia fan, both in hockey and in football, impale a head made up to look like an Indian head and pull it out at games when they were playing either the Blackhawks from Chicago or the Redskins from Washington. And television puts them on the air. This isn't something that just happens that you have to be at the game to see it. But can you imagine taking your 7-year-old child to a game and seeing some skinhead hoist up an impaled head that looks like a native, and it says Redskin, Deadskin across the forehead? Or Black Hawk or Dead Hawk, Black Hawk across the forehead. That's what this guy did. And television programmers had no problem putting him on the air. No problem whatsoever. That, my friends, is the unique racism that I'm talking about. That should have look at all the hubbub over Kiss Cam, for crying out loud. But a guy can impale, take a decapitated head, impale it with a sword, and hoist it up at a football game, and you can see the cheers of all the people around him. So I mean, look, this is what it's like. And look, and if you're a Native kid who goes to a school that has a Native mascot, now you're really tokenized, because now you're looked at funny. You are either expected to fully embrace this Native mascot and essentially be the token Indian at the school, and if you speak out, you're ostracized. That's what it is. That's just what it is. So all I'm asking for people is to understand. Look, the reason the New York State passed the Dignity for All Students Act, it was to be an anti-discrimination bill. Now, why does there have to be these kind of laws in the first place? Isn't there enough laws in the books about discrimination? You would think. But consider this. The United Nations had to draft a UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Even though they had already drafted several declarations on human rights. So why would there need to be a declaration on the rights of indigenous peoples when they already did civil rights and human rights and all these other rights? It's because we were being ignored. Because we weren't being considered human, apparently. Those rights, because there's very little in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples that isn't already in the UN Declaration for Human Rights. The one difference is, and it's certainly not embraced by the United States, Canada, or the other two countries that voted against it, Australia, New Zealand. Frankly, it's not being embraced by many of the countries. And that's a provision that is repeated throughout the document, I think as many as 6 or 7 times, that calls for free, prior, and informed consent from Native peoples on various types of policies or laws or practices that nation states engage in that impact Native people. It says you can't do these things without our permission. You can't do things about us without us. And it's not just about requiring consultation. It says that you have to have consent, free, prior, and informed consent. Some people say, well, that's like giving Native people veto power. Well, why shouldn't we have veto power on stuff you're trying to do to us or about us or against us? We certainly should. We should be able to interpret what you claim to be doing on our behalf to say, wait a second, there's a downside here. And we've seen it with every law the United States and Canada has passed. Every policy that they've embraced has, even when they, on the face of it, looks like something good. Indian Child Welfare Act, that sounds like a good thing, right? It's about Indian Native children and about their welfare. But you know what it does? It just tells the states, the federal government tells the states to prioritize placement of Native kids in Native homes. It doesn't give us the authority to place them. And they passed that law not out of the goodness of their hearts. They didn't pass that law with some constitutional mandate. Because frankly, this is where it gets really awkward. Who are we? Are we Americans? Are we just a race of Americans? Just a very small, marginalized race of Americans? I say, oh, hell no. No, we're not. I mean, even if we qualified to be U.S. citizens, we are a distinct political entity, or entities, because there's hundreds and hundreds of us. We are not a race of Americans. In fact, I reject the whole notion of race anyway as these classifications. We aren't a race of Americans. We're distinct political entities. That's what we are. And if you're going to try to say you can pass a law about us, what you do is you get folks like the Brad Keane saying, yeah, but isn't that racist? You're giving them special treatment. No, not if you're recognizing our sovereignty, which the United States simply will not do. I mean, I saw this debate about uh, Team Haudenosaunee playing in the Olympic the Los Angeles Olympics playing lacrosse. And how did I feel about that? Well, the problem is we don't qualify under the International Olympic Committee as a nation state. Why? Because countries like the United States and Canada and others will not recognize our distinction, our sovereignty. There wouldn't be a question about us putting a team in the Olympics if our sovereignty was recognized. But because it's not, and the United States has been really open about it, not recognizing our sovereignty on everything from our ability to produce our own passports to their opposition to the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which was clearly it was clearly defined. They said, look, we have a problem with this idea that this declaration seems to support self-determination in the international sense of that expression. We only support self-determination within the limited domestic sense of the word. How many links of the chain we're going to give them to hang themselves. We don't recognize their sovereignty over their lands or the resources. No, we are going to assert plenary powers over all those things. So that's why it is such a battle. And will the Team Haudenosaunee play in the Olympics? Yeah, they might, but it's still going to be a far cry from any country recognizing us as nation states. They're going to make some sort of special provision, probably because it's palatable. It's like the passport issue. We'll see countries that won't recognize our passports, but they'll still let us travel there. And the United States, because of international pressure, will say, well, okay, we're going to let them go just on a waiver. We're still not recognizing their passports. We're not recognizing their own authority to create their travel documents, but we'll let them go. We'll let them go this time. Not every time. So the idea that we have to petition as some sort of people held in purgatory, American purgatory, to even travel outside the United States is, yeah, well, you know what I'm going to say. It's racist. It is just racism. That's what it is. And there's no other way. Look, genetically, we're not a whole lot different. Yeah, we may have a little bit darker complexion than some, but not all. We're not genetically inferior or superior to anyone. We are not culturally inferior or superior to anyone. But we're also not animals. We are human beings. And our sovereignty is our birthright. All right, I got a few minutes left. I want to bring up one other issue. I don't know if you saw this. There was a posting about the astronaut Ron Garan, who was stuck in space for 178 days. I don't know if you saw this one. And what he says is that the headline says it was a lie. And what he's talking about is as he was floating around in the International Space Station for 178 days and just marveling at what the Earth looks like, he could not help but notice that it's just this real thin veil of atmosphere that separates life from just I don't want to say nothingness of space, but the lifelessness of space. How vulnerable the Earth is. The other thing that he noticed is that when you look at the Earth from space, there's no borders. There's no red and blue states. There's all you see is blue and green, essentially. And then the glow of clouds and atmosphere and the activity of weather systems and that kind of stuff. That's what you see. You don't see the division of people. You can't see war from space. You can't see hate. But you see evidence of life. So when I saw this posting, I says, well, it sounds like 78 days in space. He went native on us here. We don't have to go to space for 178 days to know what this guy learned floating around the planet. We know there was no borders. And that goes for us too. We didn't have established borders. Yeah, we respected the areas that where certain people lived and didn't trample upon it. Yeah, we had conflicts before we figured out the whole peace thing. But this idea of a northern and southern border where the United States can claim these are immigrants that come across, even though they've been historically migrating across this continent for tens of thousands of years. You can't see that from space. You can't see the hate. You can't see the prejudice. But what you see is a vulnerability. And it's the reason it's vulnerable is because man almost seems like on a mission to screw things up. And when I say man, I mean wealthy men. I mean white men. Let's be clear here. Even though white people are not the dominant character of people on the planet, it's white men, white Christian men, that seem to be the most destructive. They also seem to be the greediest, the most power hungry. Not trying to leave Benjamin Netanyahu out of the mix on this one, but again, religious zealots, I guess you would call them, I guess.
You could say Judeo-Christian.
I could say Judeo-Christian. There we go. But no, I mean, we don't have to, nobody has to spend 178 days in space to understand what we've been saying since the first white man showed up on our shores. We've tried to share. We've tried to teach. We tried to teach about unity and how to govern through consensus. It says in the Declaration of Independence, somewhere after they called us merciless Indian savages, about a true government being governing through consent, the consent of the people. Well, who are the people that are consenting to the crap that this moron in the White House is doing? I mean, who are they? I mean, I'm not saying he doesn't have support. He does. He has some of the most ignorant people on the planet supporting him. And he's pandering to some of the most violent and aggressive and ruthless people throughout the world. Authoritarian leaders. The kind of authoritarian leaders that he aspires to be and is working towards. The good news is he's old and he's fat and he's probably going to die soon. Yeah, I said it. And I say it without any remorse. I don't wish death on a whole lot of people. But you know what? There's some people whose time has come. And the problem is, when Trump goes away, you're still going to have a huge population of people who are going to cast him as a martyr for their belief systems. They're going to ignore his stint with pedophilia and unfaithfulness to multiple wives and all the people he screwed in business. They're going to ignore all that stuff. They're going to do what they did with Ronald Reagan, try to make him a saint when he was anything but. So the problem isn't Donald Trump. The problem is man. And for the most part, white men. And that goes for the folks in Israel, because they're just white men too. So at some point, there has to be a stronger position that prioritizes morality. And look, I know if I say love, it sounds funny coming from a guy like me, but it's what we need. We have to do what we can to stomp out hate. We got to embrace each other. Look, people may have all kinds of opinions about who and what I am. I'm a grandfather of 10 children. I spend time with my grandchildren all the time, all the time. It's who I am. What I talk about on the radio and the stuff that angers me that I talk about on the radio, yeah, it's important to me. It's important to me because of those grandchildren. There has to be an effort to expose the injustices and correct them. You sure as hell don't do it by bringing back the Washington football slurs or some buffoonish character in Cleveland. So I ask that people understand, and I ask that people have the conversations. And talk to your friends and neighbors and say, this is just silly to use people like this or to treat people like this. There shouldn't be a different set of laws for Native people that there is for anybody else on the planet. But that's what exists in the United States. That's what I'm fighting against. That's what Resistance Radio is about. So, again, I want to thank those of you who listen to the program. I want to remind people that we are listener-supported radio. We need your support. We need your support to the radio stations, but we also need your support to get the word out. Talk to your friends. Talk to your family members about programs like this. Encourage them. They don't have to listen every week. Trust me, I repeat myself, so I'm gonna get my message to you one way or the other. But spread the word. Share the videos on Facebook. Share the videos on YouTube. If you look, and if you want to download and take some excerpts and put them up as Instagram posts or whatever else, Snapchats, whatever else people are using. I don't do it all. I can't do it all. I'm a little old for staying that busy on social media. But please spread the word. Again, we are putting the final finishing touches on our film, The Long Hope, and I will be coming to various places, including New York City and Washington, D.C., as well as other places, to screen the film. So I'll be doing those announcements. We're trying to get into a couple of film festivals as well. And I'm going to do everything I can to educate people about what our plight is. So I want to encourage people to come out and see our film when we get it out there. I encourage people to come out and engage me in the Q&As that we will do with the films. And look, I hope we can all come away from each other more complete human beings with a little bit more knowledge, a little bit more sensitivity perhaps, and a little more understanding. I want to thank you for listening. I am John Kane. This is Resistance Radio. We'll see you next week. Yahweh.